Chapter 4. The Religious Wrong. Religion refers to organized religions, one group that derives its power from the sanction of the searchers after authority. The searcher after authority attempts to create a reality from the emotional functions of the mind. In this fanciful state, wishing can make it so, and hard facts and natural laws are no longer absolute. By faking reality, they undermine their own and others' abilities to rationally deal with the world and to focus on the search after what is. As political governments assume more control over the lives of individuals, religious power to command allegiance recedes. To attempt to maintain an appearance of importance with its reduced attention and powers, religion attempts to draw to itself the role of ethical arbiter that had traditionally been a part of the department of philosophy. It became fashionable for religion to be demonstrated by displaying proper ethical and moral behavior. Moral pronouncements emanate from the centers of religion, and it is hoped that they will resurrect some of the waning power of religion to force compliance among its supporters. Moral and ethical behaviors become confused, and they are said to emanate from God. But do they? Is ethics related to God, or is it related to ownership? Religion recites these moral and ethical prerogatives as if they gave birth to them. When challenged to prove their paternity, they say their realm is not subject to the ways of man and must be accepted as an act of faith. What if they really had nothing to do with ethics and morality? What if they had seized it as a new profit center when divine right of kings was losing acceptance? Ethical behavior is not rooted in religion. Ethical behavior is rooted in ownership. Human beings are consumers. Human beings require food, clothing, and shelter to live. They consume food, and it is consumed immediately. They consume clothing over a longer period of time before its usefulness as clothing is consumed. They consume shelter over an even longer period of time until the shelter's usefulness as shelter is consumed. That human beings are consumers of these goods is a fact of life that cannot be denied. Ethics is not involved with whether or not one eats, is clothed, or is sheltered. But ethics involves whether one owns what one consumes and whether one recognizes the boundaries of other owners. Ethics is not the result of a religious edict. Ethics is the result of the recognition of the importance of ownership in human existence. Ethical behavior is intended to maximize human well-being through recognition of the right of ownership. To the Consciologist, the purpose of life is to expand one's awareness of consciousness. Promoting a sympathetic environment for this to occur involves maximizing human well-being. The primary tool to accomplish this is ethical behavior based upon recognition of the ownership boundaries of oneself and of others. Second is contracts that recognize the sovereignty of the individual to agree with others over exchanges of ownership, thus increasing the well-being of each. Searchers after what is are primarily driven by reason from within, tempered by emotion. Searchers after authority are primarily driven by emotion from without, tempered by reason. Peer pressure is a guiding influence of the searcher after authority. Religion encourages peer pressure in its Sunday schools. One door and only one, and yet its sides are two. I'm on the inside. On which side are you? The song's emotional appeal is to forsake reason and join the crowd. Emotions exploited include fear, shame, acceptance, and elitism. Is it any wonder that the child's later life susceptibility to peer pressure weakens one's defenses against invitations to use mind-altering drugs? Sin is a curious religious concept. It refers not only to doing wrong, it is doing wrong with an attitude. It is an affront to the authority, whether God or government. It is not just an error. The concept of sin denies that the one making the error is even free to make the choice. The error is not that one chooses wrongly. The error is that one presumes oneself to be free to choose at all. It is emotional baggage that transforms error into sin. Consciology denies that sin exists. When what appears to be evil is sifted through the veil of reason, passion is filtered out, and nothing remains but error. Another area exists that organized religion claims. It is referred to as the spirit world. It involves the Holy Spirit, human souls, angels, and devils. Let's begin with human souls. Do they exist? Most certainly. Are they in danger of eternal damnation? We can agree that they are eternal. The Consciologist states that everything is consciousness. This does not leave a lot of room for other things. The human soul can be thought of as the human individual's part of this consciousness. It is the part left after completing the alchemist's legend of separating the precious from the dross. The human soul is the spark of life animating the physical creature. It is the unique individual that is sovereign over oneself. But what about eternal? That is a long time. Evidently, a much longer time than organized religion is willing to acknowledge. For eternal life, by definition, is eternal. That is, it exists forever, into the future, and it exists forever into the past. It does not begin at a point and then continue forever into the future. Eternal means eternal. If it does not have an end, neither does it have a beginning. If one's existence is eternal today, it also was eternal a year ago, 20 years ago, and 100 years ago. Consciology contends that the journey from the chaos of potential through human beings and on to infinity is a progression along the spectrum of awakening consciousness. Each step in the evolution of species is caused by the increased awareness of consciousness of one in that species. This reveals the one who is responsible for creation, 1 degree of enlightenment at a time. Because the increased awareness of consciousness is a part of what is, in time, this discovery by one is recognized by all. And the species evolves accordingly. The process of an increased awareness of consciousness is eternal. It existed before the organized religions were formed, and it will exist after the idea of organized religions is discarded. Another realm that organized religion has claimed as its own is the spiritual world, or the Holy Spirit. Consciology identifies the human mind to be concerned with reason and emotion. On this eternal timeline, reason is concerned with now. Emotion represents both the past and the future. Emotions from the past are the instinctual urgings of an animal past, of the law of the jungle and survival of the fittest. Even though the actions of human beings are no longer determined by these outside urges of the animal psyche, its memory is indelibly ingrained into one's instinctual memory reservoir. Just as memories of the past are still present but fading, and awareness of one's future state of consciousness likewise is becoming a faint and misty vapor upon the approaching horizon of the emotions. This is the spiritual realm, and its official explorers align themselves with the organized religions to one degree or another. Archaeology, biology, geology, and other sciences thoroughly investigate the questions concerning humanity's instinctual past. Reason has tempered the emotional reports. It has removed much of the fear of an unknown past that can still influence our emotions today. This reassuring examination of often suppressed vestiges of instinctual emotional behaviors has greatly benefited those who would wish to be capable of self-control through individual reason. Reason can erase the uneasiness regarding some unknown past when instinct ruled us by remote control. The introduction of reason to one's emotional instinctual past appears to have made a large contribution to the maximization of human well-being. Couldn't the introduction of reason to the emotional area of the mind, occupied by things spiritual, be of equal benefit? Probably so, but how could it be done? Matters of the spirit do not lend themselves to investigation by the scientific method. Spirit cannot be put under a microscope and dissected to analyze its component parts and how it operates. Well, perhaps so, and perhaps not. To be sure, there are problems, and the methods would have to be modified to fit the different characteristics of the spirit. Is it possible that with organized religion supplying the vocabulary by which one attempts to describe this area, that the terms themselves hamper any hope of a scientific investigation? Organized religion identifies their means for investigation as mysticism. They define mysticism as spiritual or supernatural. Well, pack up your scientific gear and move on, because no understanding will be permitted here. The mystic presents the supernatural world as mysterious and unknowable, a realm where reason is useless and faith supreme. But hold on a moment. It is reason that enabled humanity to rise above the other animals. It is reason that made self-conscious existence possible. It is reason that has liberated human beings to experience heights of emotion and thrills of accomplishment never before imagined. It is reason that has transformed the face of the earth into whatever reason can visualize. But in conquering the next great obstacle to humanity's understanding and awareness of consciousness, reason will be useless. Reason developed over thousands of years as the definitive tool for maximizing benefits the world over. It is suddenly to be impotent in the face of the present challenge. Truly, anything is possible. Yes, even this repudiation of the tool that has represented everything good up until now. That too is a possibility. It is a fact that religion has pronounced reason dead and of no value in the spiritual realm. But what is the rush? Doesn't an age-old companion deserve a better burial than that? Isn't reason owed one last check of the pulse, just for a scientific confirmation that the deceased is without life before the hasty burial ensues? Reason's coffin was being lowered into the ground when the unmistakable sound of thumping could be heard coming from within. The thumping was coming from two different sources, one in the United States and the other in Europe, in the first half of the 20th century. The ruckus was caused by two gentlemen who were not directly supportive of organized religion, yet each made discoveries that would greatly expand the influence of things understood to be spiritual. Each made this so-called spiritual discovery not because they were devoted to any particular organized religion, but precisely because they were not. In fact, their belief in matters spiritual was so basic to their worldview that they believed things spiritual were too important to be lightly dismissed as mystical matters of faith. They knew better. Things spiritual were not mystical powers reserved for conjurers. Things spiritual were an integral part of their lives, and they were convinced that the spiritual factor was not a matter of faith, but a matter amenable to reason. Their names were Bill Wilson and Carl Jung. Bill Wilson developed the 12-step program that has liberated many victims of the addiction of alcoholism. The 12-step program, developed by Alcoholics Anonymous, is 12 steps couched in religious terms. They refer to God as we understand Him. They refer to a spiritual awakening. And yet, this is not the spirit to which organized religions refer. This is a vibrant, human, knowable spirit. This is spirit that human beings can use, can communicate with, can understand. This is spirit open to scientific inspection and classification. This is spirit that is heroic, magnificent, God-like. Here is genuine spirit. Spirit that has all the supernatural qualities that the organized religions told us were unknown. What is going on here? Whose spirit is this? They cannot be the same. Organized religion teaches us of spirit that is mystical, mysterious, and unknowable. The spirit of the 12-step program is personal and capable of miraculous conversions of people's lives who seem no longer to have lives. This spirit can be understood by human reason. Organized religion and the 12-step program cannot both be referring to the same spirit. This is two different concepts of spirit. One spirit is knowable through human reason and unites human beings. The other spirit is unknowable through human reason and separates human beings by whatever, quote, understanding of this unknowable each segment of organized religion might fancy. Perhaps the religious term could be capitalized and the other spelled with a small s. But that is also misleading, because these two terms, are really unrelated. The spirit in the 12-step program is real, dynamic, vital energy that human beings can understand and from which human beings can benefit. The spirit in organized religion is mysterious, untouchable, static, and detached. Nothing short of a new term would end this confusion. Organized religion considers spirit to be an unknowable substance with mystical qualities, so be it. Since spirit, in quotes, is knowable in the sense developed by the 12-step program, the new term should communicate that knowledge. If this spirit is real and knowable to human beings, it is a part of consciousness. It is also a vital strength that humanity can utilize. Then conscious energy would seem to describe it, as well as liberated from being confused with the mystical spirit. Some 30 years before Bill Wilson defined the 12-step program in the U.S., Dr. Carl Jung was developing his psychological theories in Vienna, working with Sigmund Freud. Freud and Jung's paths ran parallel for a time, and then each created in his own sphere. Jung began with a concept of the unconscious, being defined much as the organized religions refer to the spirit. But he soon discovered that the unconscious that he had started with as being unknowable was knowable by an indirect device he called archetypes. He describes archetypes in several ponderous volumes, and the concept appears quite formidable, but it is not. Sociology reveals repeatedly that human beings developing on remote regions of different continents develop in the same ways. Different in expression, but the same in essence. Different peoples develop different cultures in isolated regions, having no possibility of physical contact with each other. Nevertheless, share developmental steps. The fact that isolated peoples do come to similar conclusions cannot be overemphasized. If each independently concludes that a form of the golden rule is a model for good behavior and for minimizing conflicts, it follows that this cannot be dismissed on the grounds of coincidence. That development is not some accident of chance in a random universe. Such occurrences are called archetypes because they represent milestones along the path to an expanding awareness of consciousness. Archetypes are what is. They confirm that a connective tissue exists between separate human beings. Archetypes hint that scientific proofs of things spiritual are possible, that the paradox of diversity and unity can be solved. Organized religions have debased this fact in their concept of atonement. The actual meaning is not a substitute for, but at one-ment, a unity of one with the other. Archetypes take this paradox out of the inscrutable and into the sphere of demonstrable fact. The atonement of Christ was not a substitutionary act. At one-ment with Christ is following the path that Christ designated for achieving his version of an expanding awareness of consciousness. Instead of the authority accomplishing the feat for an impotent humanity, milestones are indicated whereby the enlightened individual might increase one's awareness of consciousness and thereby achieve at one ment with consciousness and what is. Archetypes identify these milestones that are common to the psyche of each individual on the path to an expanding awareness of consciousness. Do they reveal the means for applying scientific method to the mind and to consciousness? This leaves angels and devils that religion claims as their area of expertise. Devils were previously exposed as the straw men that they are when defining the personality of the searcher after authority. A comparison with computer programming and electrical impulses also applies. If conscious energy is represented by a plus sign, the devil's energy is represented by a 0. Electrical energy flows through the plus side, and no electrical energy flows through the negative side. The sum of all the energy represented by the negative side of the equation is 0. The sole animating energy that fuels the fury that is interpreted as a devil emanates from the consciousness of the searcher after authority. The searcher after authority's addictive behavior is so all-consuming that the searcher after authority will enlist any devilish scheme to promote the worldview that the searcher after authority supports. No energy available to the searcher after authority would be spared in the struggle to assure that the searcher after authority's concept of the world ultimately triumphs. But it will not triumph, because it does not coincide with what is. The devil is an apparition energized mainly by the fears of those it attempts to intimidate. What about angels? Consciology holds that human beings are limited, incomplete, and imperfect. Can it be said with reason that human beings are the least limited, the least incomplete, or the least imperfect of whatever expressions of consciousness might exist? Certainly not. We cannot know what we do not yet know, but we know that it is knowable, as all is knowable in a universe of conscious energy of which we are a part. We know that the animal world is driven by instinct, and that instinct is unique to each of the millions of varieties of animals of all description that exist today or have ever existed. Each is directed by consciousness that exists outside of and apart from these creatures. Yet each is directed by a common instinct that connects them and gives them direction. Is this the definition of an angel? Who knows? If it is, it would appear that the notion of any contact between them and human beings could safely be discarded. The 12-step programs for combating addiction certainly embody archetypes. While they were devised to combat alcoholism, those suffering from another addiction became aware that similar 12-step programs could be applied to their particular addiction. As the 12 steps were adapted to encompass an increasing array of addictive behaviors, their terms were broadened to be more inclusive. Consciology would further broaden the terms in which the 12 steps are phrased, not only to include all addiction, but to include all of humanity. If we are all imperfect, incomplete, and limited, it also follows that we are all flawed to some degree. These flaws can be termed addictions, whether to an addictive substance or to addictive behaviors that distract one from expanding one's awareness and consciousness. Twelve-step programs apply to anyone who is ready to expand one's awareness of consciousness by renouncing the search after authority. Of course, no 12-step program is needed if the individual is not ready to take steps to change one's life to a searcher after what is. So the first step is an affirmation of the individual's recognition of this need. Steps 2 and 3 in AA recognize a power greater than oneself to whom one must surrender the care of one's life. This is an extremely attractive concept to those whose lives have become unmanageable in the terms of AA. At first, it would appear that any interpretation offered by Consciology could not hope to equal the appeal that such an unburdening offer would have for those who may appear to have lost any life worth living. The Consciology counter-offer could only state that human beings are imperfect, incomplete, and limited, and that one's future development stems solely from one's own understanding. It is painfully evident that the let go and let God offer has a much stronger emotional appeal than you are imperfect and on your own. But let's inspect this choice in a bit more depth before surrendering all to the authority. Until one recognizes that the search after authority is doomed to failure, it is unlikely that one would choose "you are imperfect and on your own" as a harbinger of hope. But when one identifies that the sought after authority can only be discovered within one's own consciousness, "you are imperfect and on your own" becomes empowering. Consciology states that humanity is imperfect but perfectible, incomplete but capable of becoming complete, limited but capable of becoming limitless and infinite. There is nothing that can prevent one from achieving perfection except one's own ignorance. To err is human. To correct errors, potentially divine. This potential is now. It is unlimited. And each correction of an error results in immediate improvement in one's consciousness of one's primary importance. The searcher after what is has recognized the impotence of an outward search after authority in favor of an inward search after what is within one's own consciousness. This search after what is experiences The searcher after what is experiences an expansion in consciousness of cosmic proportions, an expanding consciousness in an expanding universe. On the other hand, surrendering one's life to the care of a power greater than oneself that is presumed to be outside of oneself immerses one again in the confusion between the Holy Spirit as defined by organized religion and the dynamic healing spirit evoked by AA. The Holy Spirit of organized religion definitely requires surrender of the individual to the authority of organized religion. The power greater than ourselves, referenced in AA's Step 2, is more akin to the conscious energy as defined by Consciology. The collective, universal, conscious energy defines where we live and move and have our being. Recognizing this conscious energy that is shared by all somehow elevates the status of the appeal of imperfect but perfectible. Control of one's future becomes one's personal responsibility. Step 4 in AA requires a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This involves the mine and yours technique of Consciology, whereby all of one's thoughts are inspected over a period of time in order to separate those thoughts that are provable by oneself as mine, and those thoughts that one holds to be true but cannot be personally verified within one's own mind. These thoughts become identified not as my thoughts, but yours or others. The thoughts that are accepted as true, but that are not personally verifiable, may have been accepted as presented by a parent, a friend, a TV commentator, a clergyman, a school teacher, or anyone in which one places one's confidence. If they are thoughts not personally verifiable, but accepted on some degree of faith, they must be put in the yours or others category. By searching after what is, these other category thoughts may be brought into the my thoughts as one's personal verification process proceeds. But in the meantime, one must remember that one's future development stems solely from one's own understanding. One's own understanding is limited to those thoughts that one is able to verify as being in the my category. Those that remain in the others category will be excluded from one's future development, as one's future development stems solely from one's own understanding. Thus, the importance of this searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves suggested in Step 4. AA Step 5 recognizes that this moral inventory will require much soul searching that will expose past errors in judgment based on actions based upon thoughts of others that one had mistakenly presumed to be thoughts of my own. Step 5 involves admitting these errors to oneself and to those individuals one has wronged by these actions that were mistakenly adopted as one's own, mine, that were in fact not mine, but others. Steps 6 and 7 require a time of mourning for these parts of one's psyche that one had determined to be part of one's self, but that in fact were not. This loss may be a sizable, even majority portion of one's thoughts. To face that a sizable portion of what one, for one's entire life until now, one had identified as me, is in fact not me, but others, requires a mourning period. If one can face this loss, one continues to reinforce this process through the next 3 steps until the last 2 steps are reached. Steps 11 and 12 encourage prayer and meditation and affirm that these principles should be practiced in all of one's affairs and that they will bring about a spiritual awakening in the individual that practices them. In the terms of Consciology, practicing these principles in all of one's affairs constitutes a search after what is, and a discovery of conscious energy will certainly result. Its dynamics will certainly resemble the spiritual awakening to which AA and the organized religions refer. One more area remains of the spirit world that a few religions claim, but most denounce as demonic. It is probably most recognized as the occult. This largely secret and mysterious domain includes everything from astrology, telepathy, spiritualism, some charismatic religions, fortune-telling, fragments of Freemasonry, and even devil worship. Let's begin with devil worship, because it is probably the most misunderstood. It is possible that there are a few misguided souls that actually say that they attempt to worship the devil, though it is hard to understand how such individuals could feel that the devil would in some way reward them for their allegiance. It seems more likely that he would dispatch them immediately to their reward, so he could concentrate on the more challenging souls that continue to try to elude his influence. No, these particular devil worshippers need cause little concern. It is the devil worshippers who devoutly attend their organized religious services that are of some concern. These are individuals who would describe themselves as God-fearing people. Their organized religion is mainstream, not some strange cult. They praise God and teach the Bible or whatever holy book they favor. But listen to the sermons. Conduct a simple survey. Calculate what portion of the time is spent on how to become a better person, as opposed to the time spent on a discussion of one's fears of the devil and negative influences like sin and hell and everlasting torment. How much time is spent on what they are for, and how much time is spent on what they fear and oppose? The title of the survey might be A School for Terrorists or A School for Good. Do not be misled. If the time is spent on enumerating the fearful powers of the devil and accentuating the frailty of the congregation, this is a sermon that by the sheer force of the amount of attention given is presenting the devil as the Almighty, regardless of what their creed proclaims. Then inspect the time devoted to what is presented as good and positive and uplifting. Are the parishioners instructed to become better individuals, or to become burdened with guilt for their errors and their imperfections and their human shortcomings? Does this result in their renunciation of all hope of betterment in favor of seeking the authority that can solve these problems for them? Worshipping the devil is overt when the powers of the devil are enumerated and emphasized. Worshipping of the devil is more subtly achieved when the supposed helplessness of the individual is relentlessly overstated. Each amplifies the fears that build to prevent the individual from discovering a path that can bring reality to one's search to better oneself. The day that precedes the holy day identified as All Saints' Day has resurrected itself into a kindergarten for terrorists. Halloween appears to be a celebration of devil worship, however harmless some would paint it. It is a national goal to inspire terrorism in the younger generation. If that is the goal, it is hard to imagine a better vehicle than Halloween. Another area of the occult concerns the art of mental telepathy. Mind reading is a fascinating matter to contemplate. In the terms of Consciology, the energy of consciousness is comparable to what religions refer to as spirit. This conscious energy is all-pervading and all-uniting. That is, the consciousness of one individual is connected and shared by each other individual in the grand scheme of things. But remember, individual human beings are limited, incomplete, and imperfect. Their awareness of consciousness does not include an awareness of this common conscious energy that no doubt exists, but is not yet perceived to any reliable degree by human beings. And yet there are instances where mental telepathy appears to be evident. The conditions are always those filled with extreme emotion and passion, and the event lasts but a split second. The blinding flash of, quote, spiritual light or spiritual enlightenment. It is almost always experienced by one individual, but not from one individual to another individual. It is perceived to come from the total of all consciousness. Compared to electrical impulses, individuals in their present state of evolution simply are not aware of the amount of conscious energy necessary to communicate directly one individual to another. Studies reveal that the human mind produces a watt or possibly two of electrical energy. Perhaps 10,000 watts is required to transmit intellectual thoughts from one mind to another. The impotence of the collective when applied to the outside world has been emphasized in regard to the searcher after authority. The error of the searcher after authority has been defined as searching outside of oneself for what is only present within the individual. The same applies to the error of the power of the collective. The collective, in terms of groups of average human beings, does nothing to multiply the power of the individual. The collectives of government and religion, on the contrary, diminish the power of the individual. But when the power of the collective is the sum total of individual searchers after what is, this collective power is multiplied in geometric proportion. This power is not physical human beings trying to achieve collectively. This power is conscious energy, or spirit, operating as collective consciousness, a true meeting of the minds. This level of concerted effort is that force that can move mountains. This is the power of prayer of which religions speak. This is the power of mental telepathy that is a popular part of the occult, though rarely in evidence. This is the power of spiritualism that interprets it as contact with a disembodied spiritual existence. The world of the occult is populated with rogues and charlatans, but it is not without its grain of truth. The average individual can produce a telepathic transmission of 1 watt, and the exceptional individual can produce twice that amount. 2 watts for 1 split second of time. But a clear transmission requires, say, 10,000 watts. This should reinforce one's skepticism of those who would flaunt their achievements in these areas. But it should not negate one's awareness that conscious energy exists. It should establish that the collective consciousness is capable of changing the world. The 1 watt of conscious power, conscious energy, produced by one individual in and of itself may reveal no definable degree of change. But a change does occur when 10,000 watts of conscious energy combine to exert a collective influence. Was not each watt necessary to make the requisite 10,000 watts? Had any one of these individual 1 watt contributors withheld its contribution, would not the required 10,000 goal have been missed and rendered the collective effort insufficient? Is the individual an important part of the collective? No, not if one is considering the individual as part of the collective physical group, namely religious or governmental. Emphatically yes, if one is considering the individual as part of the collective consciousness of conscious energy. Is it any wonder that it is difficult to communicate with a term like collective when it depends on whether the listener is a searcher after authority or a searcher after what is as to what will be understood? One religious individual will interpret collective as referring to the collective conscious energy of prayer. Another individual of the same religious persuasion will interpret collective as referring to the collective government that forces individuals to act in ways that the collective government dictates. The collective of physical human beings adds nothing to the power of the individual. The collective of the consciousness of human beings is capable of multiplying the power of the individual to infinity. No, this is not to be accomplished by prayer as interpreted by religion, but the religious concept of prayer does represent a distorted view of the universality of consciousness and the power of what is. Power is yet another word that can promote confusion. The searcher after authority interprets power as the cause that makes individuals do what they would not voluntarily choose to do. The searcher after what is interprets power as the effect of conscious energy working through individuals voluntarily uniting in behalf of a shared goal. What hope is there of communication when one interprets power as the cause and the other interprets power as the effect? Power is not the cause that makes human beings do what they would not voluntarily choose to do. Power is the effect of human beings voluntarily choosing to support a common goal. The 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous has no power to make the individual recognize one's need or what it offers. Evidence of the power of the 12-step program can be found in the transformation of the lives of those who voluntarily avail themselves of its powers. The power of contracts does not force individuals to enter into contracts. The power of contracts is the mutual benefits that are possible when human beings voluntarily choose to commit themselves to recognize the sovereign ability of each to increase the well-being of the other through a contract. Human beings speak of the power to make someone do something. That is the vocabulary of a searcher after authority. This is an individual who is impressed by what appears to be so, and one who cares not for what is. The power to make someone do something is irrelevant. What is important is not so much what one does as why one does it. If the Consciologist's purpose of life is to expand one's awareness of consciousness, of what value is the power to make someone do something? In the first place, in a real and lasting sense, it cannot be done. If one could, the inmate released from prison after 10 years would be a model citizen. In the second place, it is not the purpose of life to expand someone else's awareness of consciousness. There is no power that does this. Power does not work that way. Power does not make someone do anything. Power is the result, is the byproduct of individuals discovering what is. Power is the collective wattage of 10,000 individuals of one mind. That is the power that is able to power the instantaneous spiritual enlightenment, conscious energy that dawns in the mind of another individual applying the 12-step program in one's life. Power is the bonus that accrues when individuals discover what is. Power is the product of voluntary consensus among individuals that geometrically compounds their capacity to mold the future. It is like the bonus that accrues to each participant to a contract, when each comes away with more than each had before the contract. Once this meaning of power is understood, power to make someone do something seems pitiful indeed. Political governments are instituted to make laws. Laws are intended to force people to do what they would not freely choose to do if the law did not exist. But beside the power of voluntary consensus, the power to make someone do something seems pitiful indeed. Organized religions are instituted to pronounce moral edicts. Their moral edicts are intended to force people to do what they would not freely choose to do if the edict did not exist. And again, in comparison to the power of voluntary consensus, the power to make someone do something seems pitiful indeed. We supposedly have God and Moses on the top of this mountain. Moses says the people need written commandments. Moses argues that written commandments would force the people to do the right things. Much like God explained to Samuel later, God tells Moses in so many words that his suggestion is pitiful indeed. That God's natural laws are everywhere evident to anyone who wants to discover them. Moses rephrases his same arguments, and God tells him to forget it. But Moses disobeyed. He was afraid to face the people again with nothing to show for his stay on the mountain. The last time he returned with nothing to show the people, they rebelled. Who knows what might happen this time? Make no mistake about it. God's laws and natural laws include instantaneous consequences. You jump off the cliff, you suffer immediate consequences. No jury meets to deliberate your fate. You say it is God's law that thou shalt not kill, and you say that the instant that I kill, I will reap the consequences of that act? No. You say consequences will be decided by a jury or a judge appointed by a religious authority or by a government authority. But that describes human law, not God's law or natural law. For centuries, human law has been paraded as God's law, and the divine right of kings suppressed the people under religious kings, and then kings from political governments claimed the same divine rights. Finally, the divine right of kings was exposed as the deception that it is. But why do we continue to be deceived by statements about divine laws that must be administered by human beings? Natural laws work perfectly without human assistance. It is human laws that searchers after authority have invented to attract unto themselves what they fancy to be power to make someone do something. If it is possible to be sympathetic with political, religious authorities who find they must resort to desperate measures or lose the support of the mob, one would have to sympathize with Moses. His charges were becoming restless in the wilderness into which he had led them. He had presented himself politically as always requiring that God give him a special sign before he would act. Apparently, he was one of those self-proclaimed authorities who is tormented by the self-realization that he has little more insight into the people's problems than the next guy. But such an admission is not well received with the mob. So with much fanfare, he announced that he was going to the top of Mount Sinai to seek divine inspiration. The mob received this well, and his approval rating rebounded. But after spending time on the mountain, he had come up with no revelations that could restore his waning political clout. Soon he had to ascend the mountain and face the reality that his power to lead was evaporating. He could no longer muster the degree of the people's fervor necessary to maintain his authority during these apparently pointless wanderings in the wilderness. Finally, he summoned all of his courage and returned to his followers. It was immediately apparent that he had left them alone too long. For with him gone, their actions had regressed into idol worship. But they were glad to see him, and they were anxious for him to share with them the news of his divine inspiration that had drawn him to the mountaintop. It was apparent that they were willing to hear him out. It was equally apparent that he had better announce some earth-shattering apocalypse, or his leadership would be over. As his mind frantically darted from possibility to possibility, he became convinced that nothing would satisfy the demands of this mob except some physical evidence that Moses was indeed the anointed of God. He related how God had given him this written set of laws by which they were to be governed. He could see that this was being received far better than any political advisor could have dreamed. The people were ecstatic. They affirmed Moses as their leader. Moses was back on top, and he was basking in the adulation until the other shoe fell. Someone wanted to see this written set of laws that God had given to Moses. But Moses was up to the impertinence. After all, he had been a political, religious leader for many years now. He related how he would share these commandments with the people in due time, but he did not think that such sacred pronouncements should be looked upon by profane eyes. The mob mumbled a bit, but they were used to having their unworthiness explained to them. Still, this was a big revelation to have God to write these commandments in his own hand just for them. They finally concluded that they really would have to insist on seeing them for themselves. In fact, the mob showed signs of getting ugly about this demand. Moses feared for his life. He had to come up with an answer that would quiet the mob, and he had to do it now. Moses was forced to explain how he had been descending the mountain with the commandment tablets in hand when he rounded a bend in the trail. Even though he was still far up the mountain, he saw a sight that infuriated him. He could just make out that the people had constructed a large idol to which they were bowing. They were showing this idol all the reverence due only to the one true God with which Moses had just been conversing. He was so overcome with anger that he tossed the God-given tablets over the edge, and they shattered into fragments. The mob recoiled in shock and remorse. They swore to do better in the future. They knew they could do better if he could just convince God to provide the tablets once more for their guidance. Moses agreed to return to the mountaintop the very next morning to see what could be done, and the crowd dispersed. That night, a special meeting was called that included Moses and his political advisors. They were known as the Levites, those who made up the priesthood. They all agreed that they had gone too far to retreat now. They were going to have to produce these tablets of law. It was decided that Moses would chisel the commandments on stone tablets while on the mountaintop. But try as they would, the group could only agree upon 6 commandments. Honor parents, and desist from murder, adultery, stealing, lying, and coveting. Time was running short. By sunrise, Moses had to embark again on his journey up Mount Sinai. All agreed that 7 had always been a good number for this sort of thing, and they pondered what would be the 7th commandment. Streaks of light were beginning to spread across the dawning sky, and still there was no agreement on the final commandment. Finally, the elder of the Levites arose, and the assembly hushed in respect. He affirmed that their picks for the 6 commandments had merit, and that the people would revere them. But he added, with obviously deep concern, that the reason they were in this bind was that the people hold Moses, the Levite candidate, responsible when his leadership decisions go wrong. This causes the people to start to search for a new leader. If this were to come about, a new political party would take over the privileged positions now held by the Levites. His solution was that they add 4 more commandments that will assure their positions of power and act as sort of a generous retirement plan for party faithful. He proposed that the commandments affirm that there is only one God, the one the Levite priesthood attends. That graven images were denounced as infringements on the authority of the Levites. Further, the name of their God could not be uttered in any context that the Levites had not approved, and that the Sabbath day was reserved for only those activities sanctioned by the Levite priesthood. The elder took a deep breath and sat down. The reception was immediate and unanimous. Everyone present was aware that their actions that night would empower the party for ages to come. With minor cosmetic changes, these 4 commandments were added to Moses' list. Then came the crowning achievement. They agreed to begin the list with these 4 commandments, so that the divine authority established in the first 4 would authorize the priesthood's authority over the temporal matters covered by the last 6 commandments. The last 6 contained the basis for human laws that the Levite priesthood would also judge and interpret for the people. The 10 commandments represent the most successful political device ever staged. Moses hurriedly packed the commandments into his knapsack along with his chisel. Each bade him a safe journey, and he immediately set off up the mountainside. As the people awakened and began to stir from their tents, they could see Moses ascending the face of the mountain once more. During the time Moses spent on the mountaintop, the priests were continuing to perfect their plans for his return. It was felt that they could contribute much to the drama of this first revelation from the hand of God by meeting Moses while he was still some distance up the mountain and still some distance from the people assembled below. In full view of all, the Levites would receive the tablets and raise them on high so that all could affirm their existence. Then the tablets, still in full view of the multitude below, would be lowered into a specially prepared chest of acacia wood. These commandments were to be a covenant between God and the Levites. This box of carved acacia wood would henceforward be known as the Ark of the Covenant. They would then slide carrying poles through ornaments at the top corners and carry the ark the rest of the way down to the people. The ark would be richly decorated and its cover securely sealed. Then it would be paraded before the awed subjects. It would be explained to the people how this gift, delivered from the very hand of God, was too sacred to be viewed by any but the Most High of the Levite priesthood, and even they only on one special holy day in each year. It would reside in the inmost hidden sanctuary of the holiest of the holy rooms of the Levite priesthood, forever bearing witness to their authority to rule the people. Then Moses would recite the Ten Commandments to the people. And that is exactly the way it was orchestrated when Moses did return with the tablet. When Moses revealed these Ten Commandments, the people were filled with such amazement that no one dared to expect that commoners like they should be allowed to view the precious tablets. They were overcome by the mere fact that God had chosen this people to receive this unique proof that God was with them as with no others. And each person still got to satiate his need to worship an idol, though this time it was the Levite-sanctioned idol of the Ark of the Covenant.